Welcome to Data is a Team Sport. This is School of Data's series of online conversations, videos, and podcasts where we are exploring the ever-evolving data literacy ecosystem. For those of you joining us in the Hangout, here's some guidelines that'll help you out in participating. First of all, we need to ask that you do stay on mute. And apologies for this. We would love to hear everyone's voice in the conversation, but this is a less than perfect platform for doing so. And to prevent the painful testing of mics or being in noisy or low bandwidth environments, we'd like to invite you to participate by using the text-based chat room for communication. Not you, Milena. You can start this by clicking the icon in the upper left-hand corner, and in the text message box that appears on the right-hand side of the screen, please type hello and introduce yourself like this. Hello. And if you do have any questions during the Hangout, please type it in the box there, and we're going to pause a little bit later to answer them. As well, feel free to share any comments you may have there as well. Now, just a reminder that this Hangout is being broadcast live on YouTube right now, but a recording will also be made available on YouTube immediately after we have finished. We are using the audio for our podcast series, and we will also publish notes and URLs for everyone that gets referenced on the School of Data blog at schoolofdata.org. So let me introduce myself. I am Dirk Slater from Fab Writers, and along with being an active member of the School of Data community, we also provide workshops, skills building, and consultation for advocates and activists on how to build inclusive data-driven tactics to make their social change strategies more effective. In this episode of Data is a Team Sport, we want to focus on data-driven advocacy, but also examine how data literacy takes hold within advocacy organizations. So we have two guests who are pioneers in this area and also members of the School of Data family. Milena Marin is Senior Innovation Campaigner at Amnesty International. Milena has over 7 years experience working at the intersection of technology, data, and social good. She is currently working with Amnesty International, leading Amnesty Decoders, an innovative project aiming to engage digital volunteers in documenting human rights violations using new technologies. Previously, she worked as program manager at School of Data. Sam Leon is data lead at Global Witness. His work focuses on the use of data to fight corruption and how to turn this information into change-making stories. He is currently working with a coalition of data scientists, academics, and investigative journalists to build tools that enable anti-corruption campaigners to understand and identify corporate networks used for nefarious and corrupt practices. Welcome to you both. So to start, Jess? Gotcha.
I was just saying hello.
Hello. Hi to you both. So to say you both have positions inside advocacy organizations that are effective at putting the spotlight on what is really happening. I'm wondering if you could share any lessons learned about getting them to be more data literate in their approaches to making change. Milena, would you like to start?
Sure. So I joined Amnesty about 2 years ago now, and you know, Amnesty is an organization that's been around for 50 years. We are doing very thorough and groundbreaking research in human rights. And it's an organization that has been using new technologies and has pioneered the use of new technologies such as satellite images. But at the same time, data and technology is limited to some pockets of the organization. It's definitely not mainstream throughout the organization. So my lesson and my approach in working with colleagues is really bottom up. I like to lead by example. I like to show them how data projects can improve and enhance their work. I'd like to work with them almost individually, one-on-one, and then when we get great results, to bring more and more people on board. And I can see a change already in the 2 years that I've been here. Managers already are talking more about hiring data scientists, about the need to work more with data, about having a more qualitative approach to our research and so on. So I think I think it can work. Obviously, there's other approaches and other ways to get organizations to be more data literate, but my way is the bottom-up way, if you want.
Well, that's actually, and that's actually really good, because I think Sam has a slightly different approach in coming in that, Sam, you've gotten buy-in from the top pretty straight on. So want to get you to tell a little bit about your lessons learned and your experience from coming from that approach.
Well, I suppose to some extent I was lucky that when I started working at Global Witness, there was sort of senior buy-in for using data more strategically. And I think, that's an ongoing process, because, there were pockets of people who were aware of the power data could have for the kind of investigations Global Witness does, and also the way it communicates its findings. But it is really important, I've found, to have senior buy-in. The reason why that's important is because, I often see within organizations that who are starting to experiment with data, investment is often made, or it's perceived as something that's kind of a series of discrete projects. And really what you need is sort of as a long-term strategy. That's often, it's helpful to have sort of senior leadership if you're able to kind of mobilize them to shepherd that process. Because, at Global Witness, data pretty much permeates every aspect of our work, from communications, investigations, to fundraising. And there are kind of these data skills are now essential strategic skills for us as an NGO doing our job effectively, and they need to be resourced accordingly, so not just kind of on a project by project basis. That being said, the real kind of magic, and this is where I totally agree with Milena, sort of happens when you're working individually with, for me it's working with campaigners and investigators, and I think that thing of showing over telling is critical. So identifying in the first instance, a set of maybe real flagship projects that you will demonstrate how data enhances people's work. It's all very well kind of coming in and running, brown bags and workshops and training sessions, but the real, people will really get excited and start coming to you with ideas once they see a successful data project working in practice.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that, Sam, and I think it's amazing that you have organizational buy-in and you have the strategy in place. I think that's something that perhaps is missing in Amnesty. We do have, as I said, like pockets, teams that are more innovative and use technology, but I think a strategy is essential for taking the work forward.
Well, it's interesting because I'd love for you guys to get into a little bit more in terms of the approaches. I think one of the things, Milena, you've highlighted before in the past is, Amnesty is really good at the sort of qualifiable, why can't I say that word now? Qualitative. That's it. They're really good with the qualitative information, and they're really good with story and bringing that and using that to make change. And so, and actually what we've noted with data is that, it is really important for there to be narrative. So often people that are focusing on data are struggling with getting to that qualifiable thing and getting to that piece where, there is a story. And it's interesting, Amnesties are pretty much gotten the stories, but getting to that quantifiable thing has been a little bit harder to get to. So maybe to speak about that a little bit.
Well, yeah, so it's an organization that has very strong traditional research methods. So the primary method we rely on quite often is missions on the ground, talking to victims, talking to testimonies, understanding what happened from people that were affected by that issue, corroborating information with different sources, triangulating, and so on. And we're very strong at that. And I think our research has been incredibly credible and reliable and has been used to push governments to change legislation, has been used to free people from prison. So it's been effective. But I think where data comes in is really strengthening that approach with the numbers, being able to show the scale, so not just individual cases, but show the scale, show the patterns. I think that is extremely valuable. what data does to us as well, it allows us to go in places that are not accessible to us. There are places where we can't go. There are war situations, there are countries that are closed, where their governments that don't want us there. So through data, through technologies, we're able to access those places. One of the earliest technologies we've adopted, as I said, is satellite imagery and remote sensing. So we can see from the sky what's happening in places around the world. But also increasingly more new streams of data, such as social media data. Now we have so many reports from people on the ground, and we're trying to make sense of those more and more. We're trying to understand to what extent we can feed those into research. How do we verify that information? How do we understand its bias? So yeah, that's really exciting. And one thing that I wanted to mention here is what I think gives me a bit of pleasure from my previous work with School of Data is that we have some pressure from media to include more numbers in our stories. We have a media team, we work a lot with media, and we care that our campaigns have a strong media presence. And media tells us all the time, give us data, give us the numbers, give us unaggregated numbers so we can do our own visualizations. So I think all those years that we've pushed data journalism, I think I can see the effect on that on my own organization. So I'm quite proud of them.
That's great. Sam, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that issue of remote sensing and using things like satellite imagery is so important for human rights organizations. I think, there's a number of countries in which we work at Global Witness, thinking here about Afghanistan, certain areas of Myanmar, so where we work on sort of jade mining, where these are militarized areas, very difficult to access, and data actually enables us to have a set of eyes that we wouldn't previously have been able to have, no matter, like Milena, we've always relied on kind of human sources and high quality desk-based research and field work, but often, there are inaccessible places, and I think it's a really area. I think, Milena's project at Amnesty, Decoders, is really pushing the envelope on what could be done there, both kind of using input from volunteers and also kind of with hopefully in the future a machine learning component, and we're really excited about that. But yeah, giving you eyes where you previously wouldn't have had, or areas that there's no civil society access, is really a key part of the puzzle.
And I think the bit too is that the data and the new technologies and stuff like that are actually they're enhancing the story, right? And they're also giving you an opportunity to tell the story in a different way. So like with the satellite imagery that Amnesty uses, being able to show how the fact that villages have disappeared, that's still a narrative, that's still a story. It is the bit of like, we are now adding this to the story because we can see that it's actually happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's another perspective. Actually having those images themselves, once they've been processed, are incredibly powerful, storytelling devices. And we've been using satellite imagery in some of our reports for some time, and they can give you that perception of scale as well. We work on issues around environmental destruction as well, and being able to document aerially for people, the effect that a particular company maybe is having on rainforest. So vast pictures of deforestation, and being able to track that over time is a really important way compelling way to communicate to your audience. I'd also say that kind of a key thing, as well as that kind of giving you a new set of eyes, is that comes to this point of strengthening what we already do, is actually helping people to do things more efficiently. So in a sense, there are some projects that that we do that require a lot of looking at, say, records of companies and who's behind specific companies. And in principle, that could be done by a human being, building these networks up by hand, looking through company documents. But it could take months or years. And, we're like many other people on this call, work for charities or not-for-profits or volunteering and so forth. We're very stretched when it comes to time, and what I suppose computational techniques and data offer is a way to do that quickly and more effectively. So you're able to do investigative projects or research projects that you just wouldn't have had the time to do otherwise.
And curious with both of you, so how, like what precisely do you guys see as being the benefit for social change? Like where for both of your organizations, like, how is that data precisely doing that work of being the critical thing that people actually need in order to make change happen?
Do you want to go for it, Sam?
Yeah, I'll go for it. I mean, it's really at the very core of what we do. It's we want to expose corruption, and we want to lobby for reform or campaign for reform and policy change that will reduce illicit activity, and particularly illicit financial flows out of resource-rich developing countries. So we use data that's released by governments or published by companies or leaked to us to find stories that builds our evidence base that can be the basis for prosecuting individuals involved with wrongdoing, or just exposing to a broader public an issue, such as, say, for instance, the use of conflict minerals in our supply chains and in our mobile phones and computers and so forth. And we need data skills for us to find stories that previously would have taken months or years to collect, as I would have said. So it's a critical part of our investigative apparatus, and as I said, without it, we would not be able to perform some of those investigations that are really the motor we see in terms of Global Witness's work, the bedrock of how we affect social change, and the bedrock of how our sort of theory of change, which is that we expose a problem and then push for reform on the back of it. Talking to policymakers, saying this, we've seen that this is a massive issue. This whether or not it's an issue around kind of environmental destruction, human rights abuses, or kind of lost revenues to corruption. So it completely changes the investigative process. But as I said, it's also critical when it comes to, I think, convincing people of the importance of the issues that we work on, the scale and cost of corruption to people in their everyday lives. Quantifying. We've done a lot of work, for instance, on a deal for one of West Africa's largest oil fields in Nigeria, and that cost the Nigerian government over $1 billion. And being able to quantify that in very basic terms through a comparison in what would that mean in terms of the healthcare, comparatively to the healthcare budget, or how many schools would we be able to build to that, is a really important part of us being able to quantify the scale of this problem, and not just focus anecdotally on specific individuals, and be able to really drive home why this needs to be changed and the urgency of it.
And then sorry, Milena, let me go.
No, it's very strong and powerful. I think Amnesty is not there to say that data is at the core of what we do. I think at the core of what we do is strategy, is theory of change, and really driving campaigns with a variety of means that have a very strategic goal in mind. We work because we want to achieve human rights change. So I think that's key. But unfortunately, we're not there to say data is as well at the core of it. So there's various colleagues around the office here that are pushing more for that. But I think it's really inspiring, Sam, to hear that Global Witness is so advanced.
Well, and I think just to say that, to build on a little bit on the bit around, that Sam sort of got into in terms of, you've got data about stuff, right? You've got information about like what is the amount of money that's actually disappearing, right? And then translating that depending on who the audience is, right? So, we still have to be very aware of, data is just sort of the facts, and the core of it, and how we sort of explain what that is very much dependent on who we are talking to. So, one of my favorite data visualizations to show is the Global Witness one, where they are showing the amount of midwives that could be paid for the amount of money that is disappearing into the corruption black hole. So it is all about that. But just want to get you guys into tell me a little bit more about where you see like the gaps, where in your efforts of doing, trying to get your organizations to be more data literate. Where do you really see gaps? And maybe Milena, you can start us off with this.
Sure. So yeah, I think big organizations like Amnesty, I can see that people are interested in newest, flashy, shiny technologies like big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, blockchains. That's really what they are interested in, what they are excited about. But I think there's a gap between that and us using those technologies and people being stuck at doing basic data analysis in spreadsheets. So I think there's a level playing field that needs to be achieved before you start using the most advanced and the shiniest technologies. I think there's quite a lot of work to be done with individuals to get them up to speed and understand themselves in their projects the value of data and information. So yeah, I see quite a lot that divide between managers that speak about blockchains and people that don't really understand what blockchains are. So I think there's still quite a lot of jargon busting that we have to do with organizations like mine.
Yeah. Sam, where are you seeing the gaps?
Well, if I'm sort of hearing what Milena's saying correctly, I definitely think that the big challenges which we face, and I face it Global Witness certainly is. Just helping people feel more confident using data at a very basic level. We can get into discussions of how to do machine learning, but often it's about how to use spreadsheets more effectively, how to get great summaries of your data, how to generate basic summary statistics to get a sense of the data set you have in front of you and its inadequacies and its flaws. And that's all context in terms of eventually kind of interpreting for a story. I mean, I focus when it comes to data work on the investigative side of things, and I think where there is probably a bit of a gap. I'm an avid consumer of the School of Data resources, but where there's probably a gap is something around network, using network data. So a lot of our investigations are around looking at networks of people and companies and assets and. Kind of just good tips on how to model that kind of data. So how to come up with what's a good, what things are kind of going to be your links in that network, and what things are going to be the things that are linked, and what tools do you use, and what are the key statistics that could support your case. For instance, if you're looking at, say, you're trying to investigate whether two companies that say they're separate are in fact connected, and using social media data, what are the key statistics that could help you show the connections? And of course, there are people, there are data scientists and academics who can come and do that very effectively. But I think it's something where the area that School of Data works in, which I really seen, is about equipping people who aren't necessarily data specialists feel more able to work with data effectively. That I'd like to see more resources in that. And there is the beginnings of that. So I was at a conference, the NICAR journalism conference, which is focused on data journalism at the beginning of this year, and it was great to see groups like Neo4j, who sort of built the graph database that powered the Panama Papers, or the presentation of the Panama Papers, and some of the investigative work. They're now doing more workshops and they're thinking through some of these issues, but it's tended to focus on the tooling as opposed to thinking about kind of a pipeline of how you model this kind of data and use it in an investigation. So I'd like to see more of that.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think that there's a level of sophistication in terms of the information that's sort of needed in order to really be exposing that stuff within the networks, right? And I think it's also a level of that understanding, both of being able to make the connections, but that level of very sophisticated information to really be able to show and expose that, and just the fact that you need that level of sophistication, because I know one of the things we've seen a lot of are the data visualizations where it's just the dots that are sort of connected, but it doesn't really tell you much about the level of relationships, or even about the flows of money that are going on within these things, and it's really around that.
Yeah.
So curious in terms of thinking in terms of this new era we have come into in the last year or so, where we are having this frame of sort of fake news and post-fact and data-driven confusion. Have you seen any changes in both your organization's approach to data-driven advocacy, but also with your own approaches for data literacy? Just Sam, maybe stay with you here first.
So, I mean, it's kind of seeing the way in which I suppose misinformation is able to spread via social media and on the internet, and the influence that it perhaps has had on the US presidential election and so forth. And certainly, maybe there's an argument in the UK and Brexit as well. But it's really a rallying cry, I suppose, for people who work in organisations like Global Witness and Amnesty International, groups broadly who sort of speak truth to power. We believe at Global Witness in really the importance of kind of really rigorous reporting and the power of information to enable people to take greater control over their lives and hold people to account. And the way in which information is spreading is obviously kind of, in a way, directly opposed to that. And we have, on a very specific level, we have seen to discredit investigations or discredit our own name using fabricated information that's been spread on social media that we believe mainly from actors we have criticised, so sort of vested interests. And so it's an issue that we do face. And I suppose in response to that, it's been really important for us to have been equipped with some, good kind of people with understanding of both digital and data, so that we can effectively monitor social media accounts that are doing this, and hopefully work with civil society partners in the places in question to understand those networks of that are spreading misinformation and involved in smear campaigns. So it's kind of, data again it comes in as a really important antidote sometimes for being able to understand where people are actually deliberately using misinformation to discredit you for particular purposes. But then again, there's nothing that there's a sense in which nothing has changed, because we've always just carried on doing what we do, which is kind of, very rigorous standards of verification of our reports, and that's a lot of what we do. Fact checking, making sure we've really, to the best of our abilities, tested all the evidence that we've got and the conclusions we're drawing from it. So nothing's changed on that front, really.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think from an Amnesty perspective, it's the same. Nothing really changed. We are an organization that prides with its rigor in research, and we continue doing that. We never trust a single source of information. We always corroborate, triangulate different sources. We always try different approaches. So I don't think really anything changes. One initiative that we've put in place quite recently, it's called the Digital Verification Core. So we have a group of students. We're partnering with universities from Berkeley, California, and Pretoria, and Toronto, and Essex here in the UK. And we train students from these universities to help us verify social media information. So that's really important to us. But it relates, I think, more to the overload of information that our researchers face, especially with social media information. There's something like 46,000 years of footage on YouTube. So if you think, can we use that for human rights work? That's really hard, no? Because it's so much. Researchers couldn't do it alone. So we're trying to get more and more people to help us with it. And on social media, we can see so much misinformation, but that's why it's important to create the resources you need to verify the information that is relatively new. You know, it comes in a different way than we're used to it. We're used to, again, testimonies and we're talking to victims and witnesses, and now we have all this new type of information, doctored videos. How do you begin to understand those? But we work with experts, and we train a new generation of experts to continue doing that in the future.
Well, and also just because I think, and get you to talk just a little bit about the Decoders project, because one of the things I think that is really key for, you know, organizations like Amnesty and Global Witness is for people to have the understanding of how evidence and data is actually collected and having them become participants in that. So a little bit more about, maybe tell us a little bit more about how the Decoders project has been a benefit to Amnesty in a number of different ways, including that.
Absolutely. So Amnesty Decoders is essentially a crowdsourcing project where we ask our supporters to help us with human rights research. So just to give you an example, we completed a project called Decode Darfur. So in Darfur, we've been analyzing satellite images with experts and realized that entire villages were burned to the ground by government chasing rebel militia. So there's an active conflict still in Darfur, although we might think of it as something of the past. And we could see so clearly in satellite images that this happens. Our experts managed to analyze an area of something like 3,000 square kilometers, and they managed to show different villages that were destroyed. But we could also see, and we had intelligence from the ground, that it's a bigger thing. It's not just those 3,000 square kilometers we analyzed. So what we've done, a platform that was available on computers, on mobile phones, on tablets, where people could come in and help us identify villages in the first place, because Darfur is not a well-mapped place in the, on the earth. It's lots of villages that are remote in the middle of the desert. Nobody knows about them. So we first wanted to know where these people live. And secondly, we asked our volunteers to compare images of the same village before and after what we believe was an attack. So in that way, we managed to analyze 300,000 square kilometers of satellite imagery, which was, you know, we managed to scale up quite a lot the research, and we managed to engage our volunteers, our supporters, in a way that we haven't done before. We typically ask people to sign petitions, we ask them to retweet us, to like us, but here they were involved in doing the actual research work, and as you said, we exposed to them our methodologies. They were part of the research methodology. I think they gained quite a lot of empathy for people in Darfur. You know, it's not just like reading a report. You hear about atrocities every day, and yeah, you care and you're a bit affected. But when you review satellite images and see houses that were burned to the ground, and you can imagine they felt and how they felt having to flee their homes or potentially even dying in the conflict. So yeah, I think it helped us tackle the data overload challenge. It helped us engage volunteers in a way that we haven't done before, in a meaningful way. It helped us expose our methodologies. You know, like sometimes you have this methodological kind of forward to a report, but who reads it? And we managed to bring quite a lot of empathy to the issue, I think.
And just to say, one of the things that I think is, and we also wanted to ask you, like, how many people do you think you've had participate as volunteers in the Decoders?
Since we launched the project, so it's been a year now since the first project launched, we had 45,000 people from around the world, and really from every corner of the world.
Yeah, because I think the thing that we know, or that we've learned from the sort of post-fact accusations that have been flying around is that people will. It's about trust, right? And people will believe the sources that they trust, and so I think it becomes even more important for advocacy organizations, particularly those that are trying to build some currency around holding evidence and holding facts, that they stick with having the evidence and the facts and not going for these more sort of populist stuff, but then also that they are engaging people in helping them understand, helping a large group of people understand, how do we do data collection on human rights? What are we looking for? And those 45,000 people are people that now have a much better, deeper ingrained trust with Amnesty in that relation. Just wondering, Sam, do you have anything in that thing on, like, go in that extra mile to make sure that people still think Global Witness is a trusted source?
Yeah, I mean, as I was sort of saying previously, rigor and high quality investigative journalism and reporting and research is absolutely key to what we do. And I think, as we always have done, in a sense, it's nothing new. Data, statistics has to be part of that in order to has to be part of your evidence base. It's one of a number of kind of approaches. We also have case studies and qualitative information, but quantitative information we are seeing playing a larger role, given the increased role it can have in our investigations, and also the technology that's out there, like satellite imagery, that can lend weight to some of the stuff that we do. I think it's really interesting. But what's really interesting about the Decoders project, and I'd love to see if there's anything like that we can do in the future on Global Witness, is the door it opens to people who want to contribute to the kinds of really important work that Amnesty International is doing, but for instance want to maybe don't want to do a bit more than give a few pounds a month. It gives them a meaningful way to engage, which makes a contribution to understanding this terrible, in this case in Darfur, but can help actually contribute to change. And I think in a world in which we sometimes feel a bit stuck as what to do, and where we're a multitude of problems in which we could address, I think this is a really exciting and interesting area, which clearly the technologies that help us kind of verify and collect data can help us to realize.
And also just to say, because one of the things that I know about Global Witness's work is, there's a lot of areas where, like, say with the stuff that's been happening around timber, right, and the timber that's being removed from forests that people are relying on. It's both that bit of, like, the people that are living in those forests, like engaging them in the advocacy work, and I know Global Witness does that, and also equipping them with the data that Global Witness has around them, so that they're also able to be much stronger advocates, there on the ground as well.
Certainly. I don't think it's something that we've quite yet got right, or that any NGO yet that I sort of know or news group is quite doing, but we're seeing the beginnings of it, and it's seeing organisations that publish research being much better at open data. And there's been this big movement, obviously, to convince governments they need to be being open with their data. But for an organisation like Global Witness, when we do it, sometimes our investigations are sort of multi-year, we can end up with a huge amount of information that could be a treasure trove for a whole range of groups that we've worked with, maybe to collect that information. And there's stories and leads that we haven't been able to work with people to get out of it, and making sure that that's then in the public domain and contributed, hopefully in the future, to further work and further advocacy, and empowers communities and people to continue holding power to account if it's the case of timber companies logging.
So do you open up the data, Sam?
To open up data. So in a limited number of cases we do, and that's something we're increasingly trying to do. So for instance, in the investigation we did called Hostile Takeover into the Prime Minister of Cambodia, Hun Sen, his family, their business interests and network, we published the data that we'd scraped from the Cambodian Ministry of Commerce. We've also published data that we get on tracking timber flows coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've also published data on case studies around where anonymous companies have been used in a variety of different kinds of illegal nefarious activity. So, and that it's a conversation that I'm always having with campaigners, and we're trying to build into the process, which is that if there is data to be released, let's open it up. You know, obviously there are very often genuine legal and privacy concerns. You know, we have to think about what's an appropriate level of granularity for this information, or, you know, can this information be released at all? I mean, my view, you know, my background, like yours is, Milena, is the place, or at least we work for, you know, the Open Knowledge Foundation for some time, and I think open data by default should be the, you know, the way forward. There should be a reason not to open it, because it can be such an important asset for groups that we work with.
That is so interesting. I mean, even with my background in open data, I couldn't manage to get Amnesty to release one single data set. I think people are still extremely nervous, and we know that governments are nervous about releasing data and the quality and the methodology and everything. But I think NGOs are even more nervous than that, and they don't feel any obligation to release it. So again, like, congrats for pioneering that. In the Decode Darfur project, we decided not to release the data because we were collecting. We were afraid that if we would release the data, we might give the Sudanese government a hit list, like, you missed those villages, go burn them. So we made an assessment, and that I was as well quite yeah, we shouldn't open up this data set, but we're working with individuals that might need it, like yeah, other researchers that we evaluate their request on a case-by-case basis. But I'd love to see more and more organizations opening up their data set. As you say, there's so much that can be done by somebody who has more time, a slightly different angle, a different interest. So yeah, let's keep pushing that.
Just want to pause for just 1 second and say to folks that are here in the Hangout, we have just a few minutes left, and if you do have any questions, please type them in the box. I'd love to get to them, so please do that. But the other thing, to build on this, like, I sort of see this as being the next big thing that organizations that are collecting a lot of data need to figure out, in terms of, like, you know, we often mention the Responsible Data Forum in this series, and, you know, this is the bit where we do have some responsibility in terms of, you know, data that we are collecting about communities and people that are interacting with us in terms of giving us data and all that, and making sure that, you know, we are helping powerless communities build power, you know, with the data that they have, and that they have access to that. And at the same time, we have to go that extra mile in terms of being responsible and ethical and all that, in terms of making sure that the data is protected, so that they don't become disempowered, right? And that they can have really bad things happen to them as a result of our data being there. So it's a really fine balance, and this is something where we really need organizations to understand much more deeply about how to grapple with these, because it isn't just about, you know, I think that bit of, like, it isn't just about collecting the data and closed, you know what I mean? It is about figuring out, well, how can we open it up, how can we anonymize it, and all that, so that it is a benefit to the community, and continuing that tradition that you both got from, you know, being part of open knowledge, right? And out there. Curious in terms of, curious in terms of other questions, and one that has just popped in from Daniel Cullen. Thank you, Daniel. How do you think data schools might be incorporated into the role of human rights campaigners and advocates in the futures? Thinking similar to debates in journalism about ideas of specialist data journalists versus all journalists should code. Any thoughts on that from either of you?
Well, I think in Amnesty we're a long way from having definitely researchers to coding. I think those are still quite skills. Typically, our researchers have a PhD in their area of interest. They have very strong research skills and so on, but don't know anything about data analysis. So I think it should be one of their skills. I don't think we'll get to the point where, like, I think in journalism we're more advanced in doing that. I think there's so much bigger journalists to be really proficient at presenting information and data visualization and data analysis, and I think it's not that much so on researchers yet. But I'd love to see researchers using spreadsheets really well, being able to use open data, knowing how to search and find things that are apparently hidden, but with a smart research, with a smart search, you can find it. So I think there's a lot that researchers should have on their plate, and that we should work with them to increase their skills.
So I see. So yeah, I totally agree with everything Milena said. The bent of a lot of research that happens at Global Witness, I would say, is quite journalistic, and so we can learn a huge amount from the debates that are already happening around journalism and coding, and some of the great initiatives that are happening within data journalism, some of the great communities that exist, some of the events, some of the materials. I think School of Data has a massive role to play in all of this. I think it's one of the groups and communities that is explicitly kind of committed to working with the broader kind of not-for-profit advocacy community to improve data skills. So I think that's absolutely critical. I think that there probably as well should be a little bit more sharing amongst human rights organisations as to how they're sort of dealing with this, if they are dealing with it. So for instance, one of the things that I'm doing at the moment is building a data curriculum internally, and I would love input from other similarly minded groups, like what should be on there. Are there any ones that I can come and teach at your organisation? You can come and teach. We can do webinars, etc. I'd like to see a bit more of that, and I think that traditionally, that actually groups like Open Knowledge and School of Data have been really important catalysts for bringing these groups together. Just the fact that we're having this conversation now is, it's really important. So yeah, let's see.
Yeah, hey, Sam, I'm working as well on a data curriculum. Can we exchange on that? And can you please come to Amnesty and talk about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Done.
Great. And actually that's the kind of stuff we want to see. And yes, +1 to having organizations share learnings around this stuff. Got another question, and actually Bob Gradick, great question. How much do your organizations interact with intermediaries or other organizations within your own ecosystem? I think that's sort of building onto this, but also getting into another area. So what value do intermediaries and other organizations provide to your work? And I think I'm going to jump to Sam on this one, because I know you've got some specifics on this.
I'm going to back that to Milena, because I've just got to change my power plug. Just bear with me one moment. Okay,
right.
Just one second.
We'll allow that.
So yeah, from our end, obviously we work with so many organizations. Alone, we could never do it. And even
hold on. Let me just mute the connection going on there. There we go. Go ahead.
So yeah, given that so much, our objective is to achieve change. So you can't really achieve change yourself. You have to work with others. Now, in terms of data and technology, because we don't have too many resources internally, we don't have a data scientist position. The only places in the organization where we work a little bit more with data are digital engagement and fundraising. But in campaigns and research, we don't have a dedicated role for supporting campaigners, researchers with data projects. So what we have to do is rely on volunteers and rely on organizations that support us pro bono. And that's been amazing. I mean, we are extremely lucky to have the brand we have at Amnesty to be able to attract so many volunteers. So we do everything from, hackathons. Last weekend we had a hackathon where we looked at Twitter data to detect harassment of women and violence against women. We have people that do really cool, sophisticated machine learning analysis on, for example, the Decode Darfur data we got to expand what decoders did and build automatic classifiers. All this, yeah, we do with volunteers, and it's amazing. It still requires lots of work to manage the volunteers. We don't even have a position for that. I end up sometimes doing this kind of work almost on the side of my job. So what I would like to see Amnesty is a bit more institutionalized, this working with others, potentially pro bono, potentially on a volunteer basis, potentially paying them, but still having that resources to coordinate the volunteers and people you work with.
Great. So you ready, Sam?
Yeah. So I think a similar situation as at Amnesty. You know, Global Witness, I think, is still very much at the beginning of this journey of really bringing data skills fully into the organisation. So we obviously I'm data lead there, and I'm the only kind of person who's there supporting campaign and investigative teams work with data. We have some capacity also within the digital team on the sort of more monitoring and evaluation front. But so that does mean that it's critical, like for Amnesty, it's critical for us to work with other groups. So one particularly important collaborator we've had recently is DataKind, both their US sort of central office and UK chapter. It really helped us kind of beef up data. We don't have any data scientists in the organisation, so if we do want to do projects that are a bit more of a sort of analytical deep analytical dive, we need those players like that involved, and they of course convene a community of volunteers with the data science expertise. I would like us to see us, if we can, use volunteers with the sorts of skills Milena was talking about as well, because that could be important. We obviously, you know, we work with intermediaries. I mean, do we mean that with intermediaries within the data literacy ecosystem? Is that?
Yeah, I think we should. I think well, I think in there too. And let me just actually let me just conclude this section, because I want to. We're going to run out of time soon, and I want to make sure we get to the last questions. But just to say that I appreciate the way that Global Witness in the past has understood its own limitations and reached out to intermediaries and other organizations that have expertise, and Amnesty has done this as well. And I think that thing in terms of advocacy organizations are awfully not just resource strapped, but expertise strapped. And often because they are resource strapped, they try to do everything themselves. And that is not a great way of getting stuff done, and often a way of digging yourself into holes that you cannot get out of. So I think, you know, really understanding your own limitations, and particularly around how you use data, is really critical. And looking out for ways to collaborate and all that is really critical. So before we run out of time, I do want to give you both an opportunity to plug some stuff. So Milena, actually, you want to, is there anything in particular in terms of your own work that you would like to plug that people should know about?
Sure. So I am working really hard now to finalize a project that will launch in the first week of July. So it's part of Amnesty Decoders. It's part of getting people to contribute in a more meaningful way to human rights research. This is a project, Sam, that you might be interested in as well. We're looking to transcribe and digitize documents about oil spills in the Niger Delta. So companies like Shell and Eni publish, they're called oil spill investigation reports. So these are like some lengthy PDF documents that are handwritten and scanned. So we want to extract key information from those so we can see more trends. We can potentially see instances where oil companies have misclassified or had not been very truthful to the information they've given about oil spills. So we want to basically double check what they said by extracting more information from these documents and triangulating with other things we know. So this will launch on July 3rd, actually the first week of July, and we'll be asking people to analyze these documents and images of spills.
Great. Sam?
Not strictly a data sort of project, but in the ballpark, in the sort of digital ballpark. So we've been developing a sort of storytelling tool recently that kind of helps us present some of our reports in a more sort of immersive form, because we've, like many other NGOs, been sort of very much committed to this PDF form, which for lots of reasons, including reasons about publishing your data in a structured form, if it's a very bad idea, and we want people to be able to consume our information on mobile and in low bandwidth environments. So we've been working on this, and we've recently launched it with a photo essay called Cursed Treasure on the secretive jade trade in Myanmar, and more recently, so this week, in fact yesterday, on diamond smuggling, networks of diamond smugglers on social media in Central African Republic, sort of an open source intelligence style investigation, and they're both presented in this tool, and it'd be fantastic to get people's feedback if it works for them, how they like it, if there are suggestions for improvements. It's the really idea being to empower kind of our campaigners to be able to use both sort of data visualizations, but also video images sort of more effectively in the stories that they tell. So I've written a blog post that has a link to the feedback, and I think those links are in the Google document Dirk will be sharing.
Yeah, I'll be sharing the notes for all of this and all the links that you guys have. I'm so curious as well in terms of your own work. What other things are you seeing out there that have inspired you? Like what's other resources, readings, things like that you found valuable in your work? Milena, you want to go first?
Yeah, so quite recently I've been invited to a data summit in Berlin organized by Open Knowledge Foundation Germany. And I've been on a panel with an extremely inspiring and impressive woman, Stephanie Posovec. She's a designer, and she has this fantastic project called Dear Data. Together with another designer, they corresponded for a year through postcards, where every week they would pick a topic that was very personal to them, from how many friends they've seen, how many phone calls they've made, what kind of doors they opened, and things like that. And they were visualizing that data, they were collecting that data and visualizing it by drawing it by hands on postcards and sending it to each other. So very inspiring, analog, personal data project that I think is fantastic. And if you guys don't know it, please have a look.
Great, thank you. Sam, what else have you got?
So in terms of bigging up the things that I found super useful, equipping myself with kind of investigative data journalism skills, massive nod to a book called Precision Journalism, The Reporter's Introduction to Social Science Methods, that anyone who's interested in using kind of data to tell stories and find stories in data, it's great, written long before the sort of term data journalism was coined by a guy called Philip Mayer. I also really liked, I saw recently a presentation by the folks from BuzzFeed Open Labs, presentation on mining the social web, so people who are interested in using social media data in some of their stories and investigations. I posted a link to that presentation they gave, which has lots of links to scripts, and if you're that way inclined for getting data out of various social networks. More generally, like the NICAR L list is great for kind of sharing tips and tricks. And then also from that kind of organizational data literacy perspective, I think DataKind UK's data maturity model is sometimes a useful place to start for benchmarking your organization as to where they are and what could be improved in terms of the use of data across the org.
Great, thank you so much for that. So just to say, I have one thing to plug of my own work. We have been hard at work at creating the Data as a Team Sport podcast series, and so I put together a blog post called "What We've Learned About Creating Podcasts," and tried to get our shared learnings back out there. But it is 4 o'clock, and just to say that this concludes this online conversation for Data as a Team Sport, and have to say it's been great to get into this deep dive into advocacy organizations. Big thank you to Milena Marin and Sam Leon for your time and all your efforts putting into this wonderful conversation. Also, big thanks to Caitlin Rogers and the School of Data team for making this happen. Please stay tuned to the School of Data website for more information on the next Data as a Team Sport conversation. We will be getting that out shortly. But also, just as Sam had mentioned, we will be making notes from these conversations along with the links to the video, recordings of the Hangouts on the School of Data website at schoolofdata.org. And have I mentioned the podcast series? You can find it on the School of Data website, also on SoundCloud, the iTunes stores, and Stitchers. Just search for Data as a Team Sport. Our latest episode features Eva Constanteris and Natalie Mazzotte talking about data-driven journalism, and there will soon be another podcast featuring Sam Leon and Milena Marin. We'd like to end with just a big thank you to all of our participants and our listeners. We hope this has benefited and informed your data literacy efforts. Thank you very much, folks, and to say goodbye, have a lovely day.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Bye, everybody.